Here we have a Krank amps Frankenstein, the Dimebag Daryl model. It's kind of a surprise to me. I thought Dimebag was all about those solid state Randalls, but maybe he got a deal before things went south for him, poor guy. I'm not making light of it. The owner says microphonic tube, old tubes, and there's a lot of dust on the other side down here where the tubes are. We'll deal with that in a little bit and check the tubes. But before I powered it on, I wanted to just take a look inside and make sure there was nothing amiss that could be contributing or whatever. There's an ancient moth here that chose this as his final resting place. The pots are not attached to the board in any way that I would recommend. They are solder lug terminals that are just kind of pressed up against the pads on the board and soldered. And some of them are holding up okay, and others were a bit solder starved to begin with. I would not trust that. I'll take a look and see if those can be reflowed a little bit better, but maybe maybe whoever designed this intended for there to be wires or to use a PCB pin version of this pot, and production changed. I don't know, but that's not very reliable. Beneath the effects loop board, you can see the octal sockets are done in much the same way, and some of them look very unreliable. So I'll be reflowing a bunch of those and see if I can make those a little bit something I would feel better about sending back out into the world. And on all these send return and channel switching jacks, a lot of corrosion. Usually when I see a jack like this, I don't trust the normaling, which is usually crucial in a send and return jack. So all these will be getting cleaned as well. So I'm going to reflow many of the connections on those pots and the connections on those output tube sockets and clean all these jacks, and then see how the amp is sounding and how the tubes are. But I don't want to throw tubes at it if there's a bad solder joint somewhere, as is, frankly, highly likely in this amp as it is here. And then once everything is confirmed to be healthy and all the tubes are good, which may be later this week if I have to order any tubes, but I've got some test tubes to put in. So I don't have a match quad of 6L6s right now, so I can't test that very easily. But anyway, then we'll see what it sounds like. Now, I was aware of Dimebag and Pantera back in the day, but I don't know how any of the songs go, and it's not a style that I play, so I'm not going to worry too much about playing walk just right for you guys, but I will confirm that the amp works and makes suitable noises. All right, the worst of the stuff on the volume pots has been reflowed, and every pot connection on this PCB, sorry, every jack connection on this PCB and the pot had broken solder joints. Those have all been reflowed. And I reinforced the ones here most in need of it, though. The proper solution for this would be to remove all the solder from each one and put a piece of bus wire from the pad beneath through the pin, and then use real solder, not lead-free stuff. But, you don't want to exceed the value of the amp on the repair. Now, I've reflowed the solder joints on these two. I've not cleaned up the excess flux yet, so it's not as pretty as it will be. But while the owner's diagnosis of a microphonic tube, it's not only likely but probable, It's also possible that it's the socket because these things are so starved of these stock solder joints here are so starved of solder. But in order for me to reflow the ones on this one, I've got to get off this yellow paint first. Yay. So let me go in there and see if I can just scrape it out of the way, or whether I need to use a solvent or whatever. But I'm not going to just heat that up with new solder yet. I got to get all the yuck out of the way. And then once I know the solder joints are good, then I'll worry about the tubes. All that done. The 46L6s are microphonic. V2 was very microphonic. It's still got a little bit of microphony, microphonics, however you want to say it, with the tongue solid popped in there, but that was a pull from a different amp. I'm going to get all new preamp tubes and power tubes for this after I spoke to the owner. And at that point, I'll make sure that's not microphonic. And this amp has always been too bright for him. And there's a tendency for it to want to oscillate on the high gain channel if the sweep or presence are turned up at the higher gain settings. So I'm going to be finding and tweaking the high end a little bit of this amp because it just goes really quickly into take your head off territory. But here's what it's sounding like overall. Clean channel. Maybe the only person in history to ever play a Dimebag Daryl amp with a Telecaster. Anyway, I think once it's got all new tubes and the last of the ting 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 is out of the preamp and the thuds are out of the power amp. I mean, these tubes are like 20 years old, and they're just old Softex to begin with. So I think the owner will be very happy, and I will figure out which caps are making this so damn bright that it wants to squeal at the high gain stuff. I'm not gonna make it a dark sounding amp, just a little less on the verge of falling apart. I can see here that that is the treble cap in the tone stack. This is very possibly the treble that bleed across the volume pot. I will find out for sure before I make any changes, but a little bit of microphonics in the board, it sounds like, but that may just be coupling through the chassis to some of these tubes. I have certainly heard a lot worse in 10-plus-year-old high gain amps. So aside from the very curious decision on how to attach the pots and output tube sockets, I don't see anything too scary in this. I think it'll have a happy ending. Well, I just discovered one other thing this amp may need. When I powered it off just a second ago, right after I pressed stop on the recording, I heard this sound. Hopefully it'll make this sound again. Wait for it. You hear that? And I was like, oh gosh, that doesn't sound healthy. That doesn't sound right. So I noticed this filter cap here. It's got a bit of a bulge to it. The vent, this crosshatch pattern on top, is designed to be weak in the middle so that if pressure builds up inside the cap, it'll open up and not go out in different directions. And these three are totally flat on top, and this one's beginning to bulge, and the cap's got some wiggle. So I'm looking at this, and aside from having to remove every pot to pull this board. There's not a lot to make that difficult, but I'm going to talk to the owner on that. If that cap right here is, as I suspect, just tied to the B plus node, which would be on these plate resistors here, it's possible that I could just break this off from the top, remove the 2 old leads from the board, and use a new cap or an axial filter cap and tie into this B plus point here. I prefer to do it at what looks to be this dropping resistor before that stage. This side of this resistor seems to be going to the positive of that cap that's questionable. And there's a ground point right here. So it's a matter of whether he wants it to be in original condition as much as possible, in which case I need to pull the board to do that, which gives a more expensive repair, or if he just wants it fixed, in which case just pulling this out and putting a new cap probably at this point right here where I've ground and I've got that high voltage B plus point. That's done in a lot of mesas that are serviced by the factory. And it's not my favorite, but it can certainly be reliable. And I could even use a radial on it mounted on its side right here with some silicone. So there's no reason it could not be reliable. I will talk to the owner after I publish this video so you can see what I'm talking about.